Hey there, Empowered Tribe. It's Angela T. Moore. You are getting ready to experience the next episode of Empowered, a health and wellness podcast where I share my personal journey of health and healing, tips for mental and physical health, interviews with health and wellness experts and those bold enough and vulnerable enough to share their own journeys to empower you to succeed in yours. We know that life can be rewarding. It can also be challenging. It has its ups and downs, highs and lows. I learned that with a strong mind and a fit body, you are better able to grow through and grow from whatever life throws your way. My goal is to share journeys of health and wellness, as well as tips and information from extraordinary people all around the world to help you live an empowered life. My guest, Zoe Touray, survived the November 2021 Oxford High School shooting in Michigan. And since her horrific experience, she is on a mission to preserve the innocence of America's schoolchildren by advocating for tougher gun laws and easier access to mental health services for gun violence survivors, not the other way around. Now a youth activist and national spokesperson with the March for Our Lives organization, Zoe travels throughout the nation advocating for safer schools and increased crisis and trauma prevention, as well as intervention services for K-12 students and staff. In this episode, Zoe talks openly about her journey of healing after the shooting and the formation of her organization, S.E.E., Survivors Embracing Each Other. Inspired by the organization March for Our Lives and her parents, Zoe has used her own experience and the learned experiences of other school shooting survivors to be a voice for others and a catalyst of change, working towards a world where all children can feel safe and be mentally well. I hope you enjoy the episode. So Zoe, you are the founder of S.E.E., which I understand stands for Survivors Embracing Each Other. How did S.E.E. get started?
So S.E.E., I'm a survivor of the Oxford High School shooting. And so after surviving something like that, of course, you get to meet all these other survivors from around the country and the nation and all these different places. And so after surviving the Oxford High School shooting, I actually got involved with March for Our Lives, which I have them to thank for part of the idea of S.E.E. and working with them, which I still do. But after working with March for Our Lives, our first big march was in D.C. right around that June after the November shooting at Oxford. And so once I went to that rally, I got to meet all these amazing survivors. And it was so amazing to see the way that I connected with people that I'd barely known I'd met that day. I remember meeting this one specific survivor, and their name was X Gonzalez. And they are a huge speaker with March for Our Lives. And I talked to them and then one other person for about 3-4 hours without even knowing them. And I thought that connection was so amazing, just solely based on the fact that we were survivors and that we had that shared experience together. And so once I had that experience, I realized that I'd had so many more experiences so similar with other survivors, which I thought was just the best. It was one of the best ways besides therapy or working on my mental health, was to just meet and connect with these other survivors. And so once seeing that, I decided that I wanted all the survivors to have this feeling, be able to have those connections and build those long-lasting relationships. And so that's how S.E.E. came about. And Survivors Embracing Each Other is solely just meant for survivors to embrace each other. So basically what is actually in the words. And I love that we can have those long-lasting relationships that we create and build community amongst survivors of school-based gun violence.
And it's interesting because you say something that I think a lot of people, unfortunately, who have not had a significant experience in their life, and meaning that, I mean, we all have experiences in our lives, but I think there are a few times when you have a shared experience, like a experience that a number of people have experienced at the exact same time. Yeah. And I imagine when you interact with individuals that have had a shared experience that a number of individuals have experienced as well, there's a commonality that unites you. Yeah, that's amazing. Were you surprised by how you were able to connect in such a deep way with people that you really didn't even know previous to that opportunity there?
Oh my God, yes. Because I think that I could be a social person when I was in high school, but I do think that it was just so much more different to see. It really is something sitting in a space with people who have those shared experiences. And because it's such a traumatic event at such a young age, it's such a unique shared experience that it was so amazing to see the connections that we formed right away. And I never would have imagined something like that. And so I really did want other students, especially, and of course, we want the older generations. I want C to be intergenerational, but to have these younger generations coming together, especially in a day where, or at least in my perspective, in my opinion, a lot of younger students, the way that we're brought up, and I think just some of the way we're brought up, some of the way the world has taught us is that we can be not necessarily so nice. And so I think the fact that we were so comfortable with each other and so nice to each other and kind with each other immediately was amazing too. So I had it was the best experience for me.
Are you comfortable talking about the experience that led you there?
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
The Oxford, you mean the shooting?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yes.
it was an interesting day. I think whenever I recount it, it used to be that whenever I recalled it, it would be something that was just like, even to this day, I don't feel like I was there. It's so interesting. I remember that day starting off very, very mundane, and it's so not necessarily funny now. Whenever I talk to my mom about it, we just see the peculiarities in the day that went on. So for instance, it was my senior year, so I've had senioritis so bad. Like, it was the worst case of senioritis you've ever seen. I was trying to leave school all the time. Like, I didn't want to go. But when I was there, I ran the halls. Like, it was so interesting. So the particular day of the shooting, I actually was having a really just grumpy day. So I'd set my outfit out the night before, like I usually did. But I woke up and I remember telling my mom that I didn't want to go to school. And we were actually talking about this the other day. And she is one of those moms that's like, if you're not sick and coughing and you have to go to the hospital, you are going to school because you're not trying to get out of it. And so I was trying to fake and tell her I felt sick, but I did not. But I was trying to tell her I didn't want to go. And she made me go to school. And so when I got to school, I've been having the worst days or the worst day. And one of the reoccurring jokes between me and my friends, we had this thing on TikTok at the time, and it was called Bones Days. And so I think it was about some guy and his dog had cancer. And so I don't remember how it worked. Somebody else started it, but it was like whenever we were having a bones day, it was like a really good, productive day. Like, we were having the best day. And if we were having a no bones day, it meant like, leave me alone. Don't talk to me. I don't want to be bothered with right now. It's a no bones day. And so we had been doing these every day. We would meet up at the senior window with something that Oxford High School has. And it's basically a meeting right at this window in the center of the school. And it's where a bunch of seniors can stand in between class, before and after classes, to kind of hang out and talk. And we always have to get shooed off because we were always standing there so late. So we'd always have to get yelled at to go back to class. But we were standing at the senior window and we would ask each other every day in our friend group, like, Bones Day or no Bones Day. And I had been having all these amazing Bones Days all senior year because we're seniors. But for this particular day, it was a no bones day. Like, I just was not feeling it. And so everybody was shocked because it's so interesting. My other best friend, Emma, she was always having no bones days. And this day was a bones day. So everybody was swapped this day. So it was already really peculiar. And then we all had sea lunch together. So sea lunch is right before our 5th hour, which when the shooting took place. So we left sea lunch and we were all getting ready to walk back to class together because we all had different classes in different areas. And we were walking back to class. I remember another one of my friends saying, do you guys hear that? It sounds like balloons popping in the distance in the school. But we, of course, I didn't hear anything. A few people said yes, people said no. And at the time we realized that may have been the first gunshots, but we didn't hear them because they were across from the school, because about 10 minutes later, everything shut down. Mm-hmm. So hearing that, we went off our separate ways. They went towards the balloon popping, like on that side of the school, but we didn't think anything of it. I went to class. I had sign language. So I went to class and sat with my friends, and probably 5 minutes went by. And as I'm getting up to ask to use the restroom, they're telling us to lock the doors and all this kind of stuff. And me and my classmates personally didn't know that the situation was serious. And so we were just kind of joking and lollygagging about, and even our teacher at the time didn't really think anything was serious because we thought it was a drill like normal. And so we were just kind of goofing around. We finally are sitting down and we start to realize things are serious because in our day and age, social media is a huge thing. And so we were all on social media, and Snapchat is the biggest thing at Oxford. I don't know if it's Oxford High School or just high school students, but Snapchat is huge. So we were on Snapchat and we look on everybody's stories and we see that all these students are running away from the school in the snow. And we're all so confused because we're still in the school looking. So we're trying to figure out, is this serious? Like, people even on Snapchat are making a joke of it though, until we realize it's serious. And I'm sitting with another friend at the time. There was only about three to four seniors in this class, and the rest was sophomores and mostly freshmen. So me and another one of my friends who was a senior that I actually had a second class with in the morning, we sat down together, and one of her friends calls her sobbing and crying on FaceTime, and she's just screaming, "He's dead, he's dead, he's dead." And that's when everything kicked in a high gear. And so my friend who's on the phone starts crying with her friend that's on the phone. And the friend that's on the phone is like driving away from the school frantically. But no students allowed to get their cars. So we're still trying to figure out how she got out. But then we start to realize she starts crying. So then I'm trying to comfort her because we still don't quite know what's going on. Then we start to take things seriously and people start crying. We start barricading doors. And it all just kind of happens in a flash. So it felt like 5 minutes and 5 hours all at once, honestly. And I really couldn't tell you how long we were in that room, to be honest. But it feels, I want to say maybe we were in the room for like an hour. But with all that was happening, it's so unclear. Once we figured it out, we kind of went to a separate part of the room, hiding away from the door so that they couldn't see us. Because there was a door and kind of a foyer entrance to the room. And then you can go to the back of the room. So we go to the back of the room. Our teacher is new this year, so he's kind of trying to figure things out too. And once we realized how to, figure out our situation, we had these kind of body size like doors. So we were able to open the doors and escape through the doors at the time. Or through the windows, through the windows.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it was an interesting experience. We definitely, and we talk about this quite often because there's a video that went around on the news of students running and going out of the window, and that was the classroom that I was in. And so whenever I see that video, I'll think about it because I remember we were telling whoever was recording that to stop recording, and we didn't know that it was going to end up all over the news and via TikTok. And at the time, we were very nervous just because we thought that the shooter had come to the door because somebody came and jiggled our door handle, but wasn't like saying anything. So that happened probably 3 or 4 times. Then the fourth time or third time that somebody jiggles the door, they're talking about like, let us in, let us in. And we're thinking like, oh my God, this is the shooter. What do we do? And so everybody's freaking out. And I can't remember what we say. I think the teacher, which to this day, I love him so much. He just says something like, we can't do this right now. We're not going to open the door for you. Sorry. And the person says, come on, bro, open the door. And once, of course, all the students hear bro, we're thinking this is definitely a student. And that's when we get the signal to then our teacher signals us to open the windows and jump out, like take the little jump out of the window. And at the time we thought it was the shooter, but of course now we know that it was a police officer who was undercover, who was trying to make us feel more comfortable. But after doing all that, we got outside of the school. We basically ran across this courtyard. So ran across the courtyard to one more section of the school. We were met by these police officers or SWAT officers. And then one of my favorite administrators, which I also love her name's Miss Gibson Marshall. And so I ended up seeing her. And I think I was just in shock from everything going on. So I had another friend with me, and she was grabbing me and helping me run. And we saw Miss Gibson Marshall. She saw me and gave me a hug in the middle of all that. So to this day, I'm very thankful to her because that's when I started to cry. So through all this, I'm like texting my mom and all this other stuff. My phone dies. Like there's so many little details that happened that day that I have to recount. But in the midst of all that, my phone is dead. I had just texted my mom, I love you, because I thought I wasn't going to see her again. Mm-hmm. And I see this small little woman, because I'm a pretty tall girl, and she has like 4'2", like she's small, whatever it is. And she just gives me the biggest hug. And then she says, okay, Zoe, take off your book bag. Because in all the midst, I didn't realize the police officers are yelling at us to take off our book bags as we were running. I didn't hear a single thing. So she helps me take it off. And then she tells me to run and get out of here. And I'm so thankful to her for that. But after that, we got out of school. We ran to Meyer, which is our safety spot. And that's when even more chaos started as everybody tried to find their families and get home and get out of traffic and just regroup and things like that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I imagine that whenever you think about that day, that mm-hmm. the picture is very clear.
Yes. Oh my God. So clear.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting how, and I'm sure that there's a neurological reason why traumatic mm-hmm. events are etched, in our minds, but it's amazing the detail of those events. Like you literally can see yourself in the room. You can literally see yourself as experiences are happening. I think, of course, there's some elements that are more clearer than others, but it's amazing how even as days go by, months go by, years go by, those experiences, like I said, are like literally etched in our minds, and we will never forget them. But what really is interesting and amazing is I know that there were many students at the school that had that experience, right? And teachers and staff that were part of that experience, but yet you have taken that experience and kind of used that as something to help other people, to support other students. And I really want to talk about that because an experience like that can exist at a period of time and have a very negative impact on all the people that are connected to that experience. Or it can be used in a way to, some positive can come out of that. You're definitely doing that. And so I want to give you the opportunity because in your bio, you say that you are on a mission to preserve the innocence of America's school children by advocating for tougher gun laws and easier access to mental health services for gun violence survivors, not the other way around, which I thought was very interesting. So can you talk more about your mission?
Of course. With that being said, and with preserving the innocence, of course, of America's school children, I think that, especially as I get older, so I'm only 20, but I have this running thing that whenever I'm talking to I don't even think I do it on purpose, but I say all the time, oh my God, I'm getting so old. Oh my God. My back was cracking this morning. My knees hurt. And whenever I'm around, whenever I'm around someone wiser than me, they're like, oh my God. Like, what is... So me personally, I think I'm getting old, but
okay.
Whenever I say things like that, it's so funny to me because I know I'm still young, but as I see these younger students that are under me, for instance, the Uvalde students, which C had an event with back in almost an immediate year after the Oxford High School shooting. So the Oxford High School shooting was November 30th. So it was November 30th, 2021. And then I had the Survivors United Play Day with C, which was where me and then C got together with some Oxford students who really wanted to go to Uvalde also, went down and had a field day and had this amazing day with these survivors from the Uvalde shooting that took place in May. So that was on November 19th, November 2022. So that was almost exactly a year after. But seeing these students that were younger than me, it broke my heart just to see the fact that when you're younger, you're supposed to be living in innocence. Like, you shouldn't have to worry about running from a school or hiding or jumping through windows. And the graphicness that I saw or heard about the Uvalde shooting and having to hear that kids had to shield themselves with other kids just to play dead that's not something anyone ever wants to hear for their child, especially in 3rd and 4th grade. So these are 9 and 10-year-olds that we're talking about. And the fact that these students should only worry about eating chips, drinking Capri Suns, and running around, and they have to worry about something else instead. That's not what I want for our children in America. That's not what I would want for my kids when I get ready to have kids, or what I want for my cousins and nieces and nephews, or whatever the case may be, because I also have a nephew. So things like that is what my mission is really about. So preserving that innocence and making sure that they can grow up and just be kids. Like, I was able to just be a kid. And although I think a lot of people will tell me, you were 17 when the shooting happened, like, that's, you were still a child, but I was going into adulthood. And so I think sometimes I'll try to lessen my experience. And I do think I was young and I had to grow up a little faster after that happened. But I want these younger students to be able to have their full childhood and blossom in the way that they were supposed to. And then also having access to mental health resources. So I do think that in this case of, I don't try to speculate too much on the case of the Oxford High School shooting and what our shooter was feeling or what he was going through. But I do know that if students had more access to mental health care, I do think that a lot of these shootings wouldn't take place if mental health was established a lot earlier on in our lives. And so I know for me, mental health, especially being in the Black community, I'm sure that you know that it's mental health is very stigmatized, or there's a very big I don't even know if stigmatization is a word, but it's very okay. So it's very big stigmatization. That mental health is just something that's looked down upon or makes you look weak. And I think without saying it, that's something that took place in our household. And my mom personally is very, very huge on mental health, and so in her own way. She's very spiritual. And so she will sit in her room and burn sage and talk to us about how we need to have our connection with God or whatever that spiritual connection may be, and say, and you need to think through things because it's good for your mental health. As I told her I want to go into my career, she talks a lot about mental health and how I need to get ready before I go off to DC and prepare myself mentally and make sure I have a good mental state and well-being and things like that. But on my dad's side, my dad's from West Africa. And so I love him dearly, but I think that mental health was also very stigmatized in West Africa, where he grew up, being that it can be a very misogynistic country, and a very, it can be a very setback country at times. And so in the household, like, his thing is like, do not cry, do not show, too much emotion. He is more of the provider of the family. So he provides for us, and it's not necessarily about emotion. My mom's the emotional aspect. And so I think that's the case with a lot of people in Black and brown communities, but also the world, is just that we don't need therapy, or we don't need to talk about our mental health. But I think if we did talk about our mental health, if I would have known that mental health was even a thing at 8 and 9, I could definitely prepare myself better. And I think that I'd be better off now just being able to control my mental a lot better, because if you don't have your mind, you don't have anything. And so I think that if we were to teach our children things about mental health, whether it's like cute mental health books at a young age, and then we start to bring them into more developing classes as they get older, we'd be a lot better off in the world. And I do think there would be less school shootings, which I do think a lot of these things can be preventable. And this is just one of the ways that we can start to work to prevent future shootings, because although it's the unfortunate truth that more shootings are going to happen. Mm-hmm. And the whole point of, See and March for Our Lives and Mom's Demand in every town is to stop these occurrences before they happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I told you, it does make sense. Well, as I told you before our interview today, mm-hmm. I share with you that I'm a licensed counselor. Mm-hmm. And so I, of all people, understand the importance of mental health. Mm-hmm. I'll say this. I believe that mental health should be looked at just like physical health. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Something that you do each and every day. And just like you eat well and you take care of yourself and you exercise for your physical health, there are things that I think that people should be taught mm-hmm. from a mental health perspective. Like, what are the things that you need to do each and every day to do mm-hmm. well? And if you don't know those things, just like you would go to a coach, or just like you would go to a trainer or work with someone, a nutritionist that teaches you mm-hmm. those things, that's why you would seek the help of a mental health professional to help you with your mental health. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes, Zoe, when we think about mental health, we often think about mental illness. So we think about bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, depression, mm-hmm. All those different things. We don't think about, and those are illnesses. And just like in physical health, there's heart disease, there's stroke, there's mm-hmm. cancer. And just like we encourage people to go get your screenings and to eat well and take care of yourself to prevent those things, it's the same thing you would do for mental health. Mm-hmm. Is you would do proactive things to keep you mentally healthy so you don't have mental illness.
I love that idea. I love that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what's interesting is you wouldn't tell, and I'm glad that you emphasized that you would have liked to have had mental health support when you were 8 and 9. Mm-hmm. Like you wouldn't tell a kid, like, don't eat well, don't exercise, because mm-hmm. you're 8.
Right.
Or 9. And the same applies from a mental health perspective. Of course, mm-hmm. you would want an 8-year-old, even a 6-year-old or a 3-year-old to understand how to express their emotions, to know that it's okay to cry, to understand mm-hmm. what is an emotion, to increase emotional intelligence, like be able mm-hmm. to name your emotions as you're experiencing them and not feel shameful because you're feeling scared or or nervous or anxious, mm-hmm. and being able to put a name and a label on that experience as on that emotion that you are experiencing during an experience. Mm-hmm. I think it's so important. But I think people like you mm-hmm. will help start programs like that.
I hope so. I really do.
Yeah. So don't give up on your mission, because unfortunately, I don't think, they don't like to listen to the older people. But those younger people like yourself, mm-hmm. You can be a voice for people your age, mm-hmm. as well as the younger people, because you're not so far removed from that mm-hmm. age group. And so I think more people will be willing to listen to what you mm-hmm. have to say, not just from your lived experience and what you have experienced, I'm sure not just with the shooting, but throughout your life. You know, you mentioned your father, you know, being from a different country and your mom being, all of that has an influence on how we see and experience the world.
Yes.
Yeah. And being able to have someone that you can talk to or be able to share your thoughts about your experiences is really important. And unfortunately, there is a stigma. There's a stigma associated with expressing feelings, and there's a stigma with associated with, if you are feeling overwhelmed, to say it and to actually go seek help. It's like, oh, you know, suck it up. Don't be so weak. Don't cry. And that's the last thing that a person that is struggling in an area needs to hear.
I think so too. And I appreciate the sentiment. I do think that I think there's going to be so many people that change the world, but I do think out of everything that the young people today that are coming out, especially a lot of these young advocates, are going to be the change. And I may be a little biased, but I do think that's going to be the case.
Yeah. I think you are a world changer, lady.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, most definitely. Now, as we just talked about, I mean, you are a youth advocate, and but you also, now you mentioned March Our Lives organization, but you are a national spokesperson for that organization, correct?
Yes.
So what can you tell me about your role as a national spokesperson for March Our Lives?
With March Our Lives, I love March Down. I've been working with March since right after the shooting, actually, which is so interesting. That's another thing that kind of brings me back to my parents is when I got involved with March at first, I actually didn't want to be involved with March, but it's only because I didn't want to be involved with any gun violence groups, which I didn't even know were a thing at the time. So I know that March was, I want to say they were verified on Instagram at the time. So they DM'd me after the Oxford High School shooting, probably in January and then February, because they were doing a rally in the Michigan State Capitol, which is in Lansing. And that's probably about 2 hours from me. And they asked me to come speak about my experience, basically. So write a speech and come speak. And I remember thinking, are these people nuts? Like, what do they mean? Do they want me to come speak about something? But it wasn't just because of my experience. It was more of like, they want me to come speak. Like, I'm so confused. And I'd never heard of like gun violence prevention groups. And I even at the time, which I often tell a lot of interviewers and people, is that I didn't know gun violence was really an issue in the US because I think unpurposefully I was a sheltered kid. And so my mom kept me on, which I'm thankful she did now because I'm a little smarter for it, but she had this rule for me and my sister that we couldn't watch anything but PBS on weekdays, and then we could only watch Disney Channel or whatever on the weekends. But there was no news in between. And so I think I'd maybe heard, I knew that they were a possible thing, and that maybe even Parkland, I didn't know the name of Parkland at the time, but I knew that some students may have been shot at school, but I had no recollection of it. And so when they reached out, I did a little bit of research, and I was thinking, I'm not going to speak. That is ridiculous. Like, I'm still grieving. And I was very set in grief at the time. And so I was so stewed in my grief. I was having a really hard time besides going to Oxford, because I live about 30 minutes from Oxford. So going to Oxford almost every day, like staying weeks at a time to hang out with friends, because that was our coping mechanism, was just hanging out. And we always ended up talking about the situation like almost every single day. But it was comforting for us because we'd been through it together. So there's that shared experience coming back again. And I talked to my parents about it. And my mom, like I said, is very spiritual. And I actually had no idea that my dad could be spiritual until I told him about the March for Our Lives and the fact that they wanted me to come speak at this Capitol event. And he sat me down with me and my mom, and they both sat me down. And he told me how he had this vision for me, this dream that he saw me speaking in this place and going and traveling and speaking here and doing all these amazing things. And my mom is very big on like prophetic dreams, but my dad, of course, being from West Africa, you know, he still has a thick accent. He's all the mental health aside. And so I was like, what do you mean you had a dream? What are you talking about? And so he talks about it more. And he said, I really see this for you. And my mom goes into saying the same thing and how this would be good for me just because I was so stuck in my grief. And she was talking about how it would be really good for me to get out and meet these people and go and share my story. And maybe I'd be able to help someone else. And so they mentioned to me the first time, I was like, okay, I'll think about it. I lied. I wasn't thinking about it. I didn't want to do it. And they sat me down a second time, and I just really clicked for me, because I also had a horrible fear of public speaking, because the night before I had to public speak for a project in class, I would throw up. Like, I hated speaking in front of people. And they mentioned it to me again, and I said, okay, so both my parents, it's one thing if it's my mom, but both the fact that my dad, being his emotionally drawn self, can come and tell me that he saw this for me, I should go do it. So I wrote them back, or I DM'd them back, because they DM'd me like 3 times. So I DM'd them back. I told them I would come do it. I wrote the speech and I went and spoke, and it was scary, but it was one of the best experiences. One, again, because I got to meet some of the other survivors, but the feedback from it was amazing. And so seeing that people were, all of my friends at Oxford were proud of me for going to speak, and my mom and my family, and then just meeting all these different gun violence prevention advocates were just so proud of me. And they embraced me. It was such a warm embrace of just congratulations and things. And so I started with that, and then I've just been with March ever since. So I left there, and I think I spoke at one more place, and then I went to DC with them in June, and I spoke in the National Mall in DC and did a piece with them for the Washington Post. And that was my first like big story, where John Woodrow Cox, he's a writer for the Washington Post, and he followed me around for he's like a follow reporter. So he followed me around for, I want to say, 4 or 5 days, the whole time of the rally, and did a story following with me, and it almost became like a best friend. So that was one of the best experiences I've had. Him and a photographer named Ricky, I believe, Garcia. And so that was something else that I did with March, and then just doing all these different things with them. So I went to Texas with them, and that's where I met my first Uvalde survivor. And her name's Caitlin Gonzalez. She's actually very beneficial, or very important in my life. And so she also helped with the event for the Survivors United Play Day, but doing all these things for them. So now it's kind of like when you call me, you need me, or when I call you, I need you. And it's so amazing to be able to do these things with them and share my story, and hopefully share the message that for these other survivors, you can do anything that you put your mind to, and that you have a support system, and reach out to me if you need me. So it also helps further the message of S.E.E whenever I work with March, that we can reach out and grab these survivors, and that they know about S.E.E and know that they have these connections that they can make, and that they have a support system, and they have support in their corner.
It sounds like that event was transformative, not just for you, but also your family.
It was very transformative. To this day, my dad, if I do something, he'll be like, remember who had that dream? So I just talked to him yesterday, and we were bringing up I haven't talked about it in so long, and I'd forgotten that we even had that conversation, and we were just talking about how we sat down and had that conversation as a family. My siblings were somewhere else, but they sat me down specifically for that. So I'm very grateful to my parents for pushing me to do it, because without them, I honestly do think I would still be sat in grief and dealing with the situation. I'd be at a very different point in my life.
Now, I imagine in your travels, as you've met other survivors of gun violence, that you've been impacted by those conversations and those experiences. What do you think has been the most impactful, your conversations with survivors, other survivors of gun violence? You've talked a little bit about it, but what do you think has been the most significant?
I think just hearing the gravity of the situations of which other survivors have gone through. So I think whenever I have these conversations, it's so amazing, one, to just, again, be able to sit in a shared experience. And I found whenever having these conversations, the way that we connect is almost like as if we've known each other our entire lives. And so I've had that experience often, not all the time, but often, to where I sit down and talk with this person, like I did with X Gonzalez, and talk as if I've been friends with them. And so we'll sit and we'll immediately jump into what was your shooting like? What was my shooting like? And that's such a crazy statement to even say, especially for kids. But being able to sit and talk about, did you jump out of a window, or did you run out of the door? Did you hear gunshots, or did you not hear gunshots? Were you hiding under a table, or were you hiding in a closet? It's so tragic, of course, to be able to have to even ask those questions or talk about something like that with such normalcy. But being able to sit and have those conversations, I got to hear a little bit more about Parkland, again, because I didn't know that school shootings were even, you never really know until it happens to you. You don't think about it until it happens to you. And that's also a really sad truth, is that most of America, like myself and my family, we never would have even thought twice about school shootings after seeing it on the news. It's more like when you see it on the news, oh, my thoughts and prayers are with them. Then when it happens to you, bump the thoughts and prayers, we need to do something. And I wish that would kind of turn around to whenever somebody sees something on the news, we spring to action instead of thoughts and prayers. But being able to kind of see that, me and my family realized that this is this is a huge epidemic in America. It's almost as deadly as like COVID. If you think like it's a pandemic, the fact that these school shootings are taking place all around America. But having those conversations with other survivors, that's one of the most interesting things to me, is being able to hear not necessarily all the gory, gruesome details, but to hear how your shooting took place and how your story is different than mine and how your experience was different than mine. So I may have jumped out of like a window, but it wasn't from 2 stories. I jumped 2 inches, like I jumped 2 or 3 inches, and it was still, I was out of a window. But seeing that, and I personally didn't hear gunshots, and because I was on a different side of the school, we thought the shooter came to our door. And then hearing that this person had to cover themselves with a dead body of a friend, it's a very gruesome detail. But hearing that, the experience, sometimes it's hard because you have survivor's guilt and you'll compare your stories. And then I'll think, okay, this person had to shield themselves with a body. I didn't deal with anything that serious. I shouldn't be complaining and da, da, da. But then you have to realize, like, you don't have to compare your stories. You both went through something very traumatic. No matter the details of the situation, you both went through something that no student, no child, no person should have to go through. But that to me is the most interesting part, being able to hear the severity and the differences of situations that each person has went through or has gone through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you say something that's very interesting, because I think it's interesting, because I interviewed a gentleman named David Bayers, and he said that comparison is the thief of joy. And
oh my God.
Yeah, I thought that was so significant. And the reason that phrase really resonated with me, and then coupled with what you just said, is I also think that if we compare our experiences, like if you have had, like for instance, I lost my mother tragically when she died of a massive stroke when I was 13.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. But as a therapist, I've had to recognize the importance of, whenever I am in session with a client and they say they also have lost a mother, to understand that my experience losing my mother is going to be very different from theirs. And that I would be doing my client a disservice to compare my experience to theirs. But as a individual, and not even just as a therapist, it's important for me to create open mind in time and space, open space, when someone is sharing their experience, to hear their actual experience and to not compare it to mine. And I think, unfortunately, we do that a lot. But I also think that if you have had a traumatic experience, if your experience is not as quote unquote traumatic as someone else's, you feel guilty.
Yes.
Yeah. For feeling bad about your experience. But your experience is your lived experience, and your experience impacted you in a very impactful way. And just because, as you mentioned, you may not have heard the actual gunshots, but there was something very significant happened at your school which changed your life forever.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's not that you measure one experience over the other. Your experience was more traumatic than mine. It's understanding that now we share a common experience, even though different, that unites us. And we can either use what has united us to take action and help others, or we can just feel guilt and shame about how we feel about our experiences. And unfortunately, that's the thing that allows someone to stay stuck in grief. It keeps the healing.
I'm sorry, I did not mean to. Go ahead.
I said it keeps healing from starting and continuing.
Of course, my mom will mention comparison a lot, which I think is interesting, because I had, I think all little girls do, but I had a lot of, what is the word? A lot of, I think more than that, insecurities growing up. And so my mom I would always compare myself to these girls, and, oh, I don't look as pretty as them, or my skin isn't as light as theirs. And her biggest thing, she used to get so frustrated with me after telling me time and time again, stop comparing yourself to other people. So I think that taking that aspect of my life, I've always been comparing myself to other people. But I realized that most of us do that. And so I had to learn that from her, is to stop comparing myself. And I took it from the insecurity aspect of my life when I was a little girl to my 17-year-old self, comparing myself as a survivor of a school shooting, which is such a bizarre phrase to even come out of my mouth. But to be able to say that, I have to learn to stop comparing myself, as does the rest of the world.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think unfortunately our way of living kind of almost forces you to compare yourself to other people. It's
I
like,
think so too.
yeah, I was talking to my husband about the Olympics, and I was saying how it's interesting. Like if you win gold, it's memorable, but if you get second, people forget about you.
Wow, I never thought about it like that, but yeah. Oh my
And
God.
it's really, yeah, it's really unfortunate. And even as it relates to whatever is deemed as beautiful or in style changes so drastically. And it can vary depending on where you live, what is being upheld as great versus not so much, what is the fad or fashion at that time. And really, and you'll learn this more, Zoe, as you get older, that you were uniquely and beautifully created. And there's no one that can be you as great as you can be you. And you were perfectly made for that. And my hope for you is that as you continue on this journey, that you will use your experiences as you have to not only inspire other people that have experienced gun violence, but also, I believe, as a beautiful Black strong woman, that you'll be able to inspire other Black strong women like yourself to use their experiences as platforms to take action in their lives.
Hope so. Thank you. That's the goal. That's the goal.
Yeah. So what's next for you? What do you hope to do as you move forward in the future?
I hope to go into diplomacy. And so, of course, I want C to be a big part of my life. That will never change. So hopefully we are not an official nonprofit. So I always say organization, or I try to, just so that we can work on it. So we are in the works of getting our 501c3 status. So find us freaking working on that. But it's been so amazing how things have worked out for us regardless. So finishing up that aspect of the nonprofit business, and then going into just making more events that are catered to survivors of school-based gun violence, but even branching out. And so, for instance, I went to a CRT training in Nashville a couple weeks ago now, and it was just the most amazing experience. I met so many people from the NAACP and so many people from so many different organizations that have to do with, of course, upholding Black excellence, basically. And so to be young, gifted, and Black is something that I've been keeping in my mind, in the back of my mind. Going to a predominantly white high school, that's not really something that I was very centered around or even knew about. And so once shifting from a predominantly white institution to an HBCU was such a big culture shock, but I learned so much that I want to delve into, and I want C to be a part of that. And so, for instance, I learned about Black children's literacy rates and how extremely low they are. And even that was disheartening, because we had the chance to meet with one of the Black librarians from a library somewhere in the U.S., and they talked about the fact that especially Black students or Black children's literacy rates are so incredibly low, and that these young Black children don't know how to read and don't know how to write, which is so horrible, because I escaped my life when I was young and my life wasn't bad, but I escaped my life through books. And so even to this day, I'll ask my mom, do you remember watching this movie about yada, yada, yada? Oh, that was a book. Because that's how much I delved into or was enveloped into the world of literacy. And so I want other students to be able to have that experience. And so I do want C to start to be able to do different programs that also involve Black children's literacy rates and Black children's writing workshops and different things where we can go read. There's also this stuff about banned books in the U.S. and with so much going on politically, and that has to do with systemic racism and how they're banning all these books that have to do with diversity. One's called The Rainbow Fish, which is a book that I read when I was in elementary school, and now that book is banned, which is insane to say, because the children's book, even though it's going into diversity in simpler terms, it's a children's book that's banned, which makes no sense. So even going to teach banned books to these children, of course not all, but teaching some of these banned books that have to do with diversity and how you're welcome in this world, and then doing writing workshops for students. So that's one thing that I want C to get into, besides or along with gun violence prevention programs and then mental health programs. And as far as for myself in my future, I want to go into the foreign service industry. So I want to be a foreign service officer and go into diplomacy around the U.S., but also in surrounding countries and countries around the world.
I love it. And I have no doubt you will accomplish all of that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, please let me know if I can be of support to you in any way.
Of course, I greatly appreciate you. And I want to thank you so much for having me on the podcast today. I've enjoyed it so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you so much.
Of course, of course.
Thanks for listening to Empowered with Angela T. Moore. Feel free to share this episode with someone you think would enjoy it. New episodes come out weekly. Follow our show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening right now.